White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. In partnership with Museum Arts Culture Access Consortium presents Adapting and Advancing, Day 2 Future, Cultural Accessibility After the Pandemic. At center, black text on a white background with title of presentation. At bottom, logos for MAC and CCAC. At top right, mini video of speaker.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Day 2, Future, Cultural Accessibility After the Pandemic. This program is presented by MAC, Museum, Arts, and Culture Access Consortium based in New York, and CCAC, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium based in Chicago. And both of our organizations are local access networks focused on making arts and culture more accessible to people with disabilities. My name is Christina Gunther, and I'm the founder and president of Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, CCAC. My visual description is I'm a white woman in her 30s. I have glasses and dark brown hair, and I'm sitting against a wall with a window with some sunlight coming through. And just like last week's program, today there's also sun in Chicago, which is cause for celebration. I hope you are having a good day wherever you are located. We're so excited to be offering these two programs from CCAC and MAC. It's really been a silver lining during the pandemic and during this really hard time to be able to collaborate with colleagues and really cross lots of different state lines to be able to connect with people all around the country. So I want to give a shout out to our friends at MAC for your awesome partnership, and just be really grateful for the opportunity for us to be working together. And I'm sharing right now a screen with MAC's logo as well as CCAC's logo, just as another way to say thank you to everyone for helping make today possible. And finally, I wanted to remind you that while today's program is free, there are a lot of costs associated with it, and we would really appreciate any donations of any amount, but there is a $10 suggested donation to offset the program cost for today's event. So right now I'm sharing a screen with a QR code that you could use to automatically go to a place to donate, or you can visit our website, which is chicagoculturalaccess.org/support. And with that, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Claire Killey, who is the co-chair of Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, who will be our moderator for today's event. Claire?
At left, an ASL interpreter signs. At right, Claire Killey.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Claire Killey. My pronouns are she, her, and I am, as Christina said, one of the co-chairs of CCAC. Very excited to have you all joining us today for this part 2 of a 2-day event focused on accessibility in cultural institutions during the pandemic and beyond. A visual description of myself is that I am a 30-something white woman with long dark hair. I'm wearing a dark green collared shirt with a gold necklace and black sweater, and I'm in front of a solid white background with a logo representing CCAC. Just a couple housekeeping items that I wanted to cover before we get moving with our session today. We are providing ASL interpretation as well as real-time captioning. We've also asked our presenters today to verbally describe any visual information that they share. So if I notice that someone's forgotten, I may kindly interrupt just to ask them to describe their slides. This event today will be recorded. So if you need a break, movement, stretching, we encourage you to do whatever you need to do. We will have the recording available afterwards if there's anything that you feel you missed and you'd like to circle back to. We also do want to just kind of reiterate a safe space today and encourage our speakers and everyone here to join us in this safe space mentality, as we know that we're all on different phases in our access journey and here to learn together. A reminder that you can use the chat if you have any tech issues today, and we'll be sure to provide support as best we can to make sure everybody's having a meaningful engagement experience. So again, last week we discussed how organizations have creatively adapted during the pandemic. And today we're going to explore where we go from here, what's next as we look ahead. So what does the future mean for accessibility and the strides that we've made online, virtually during this time? We're going to have 9 speakers today, some of whom will be co-presenting. Almost everyone's been asked to stick to about an 8-minute presentation. And after most of those presentations, we're going to save some time to ask a few questions, pressing questions that have been posed by you, the audience that registered. So thank you for submitting those in advance to really create rich discussion today. First, we're going to kick things off once again, and we'll be joined by our MAC team members who focused on how cultural organizations have incorporated accessibility virtually. So the MAC team members are going to join now, and they'll speak for about 15 minutes. So please join me in welcoming back Bojana Kokliat and Tony Saya, who will continue with part 2 of their presentation, Mapping Virtual Access, Current and Future Approaches. So Tony and Bojana, please introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and give a visual description of yourself. And looking forward to hearing your presentation.
At top, Bojana and Tony. At bottom, an ASL interpreter.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Bojana Kokliat. I am a white woman with short brown hair cut into a bob. I'm wearing a little bit of red lipstick today. I have this dark blue shirt on, kind of almost like a red pixelated pattern on it. And behind me is a light green wall with some artwork. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the project leader at MAC, heading up the Mapping Virtual Access and Cultural Institutions project. And just briefly, if you weren't here last week, that project started in September. Its goal was to document approaches to access during the pandemic, just seeing what shifts there were, what the barriers and challenges were for the project. And I will now hand it over to to Tony.
Hi everyone, I'm Tony Saya. I'm a white woman in my late 20s. I have big brown framed glasses on and my long brown and blondish curly hair past my chest, and I have a black silky tank top on, and I'm in front of a beige wall, and I use she, her pronouns. And I too am a MAC project leader for another grant that also is happening during virtual times. And I've also been on the subcommittee for this grant project that we discussed last week. So I will go ahead and just quickly share screen. Okay, and so again, welcome to our presentation. And this first slide has the title, so Mapping Virtual Access, Current and Future Approaches. And then it just has our name, so Bojana Kokliat, and she's the Mapping Virtual Access in Cultural Institutions project leader. And I'm Tony Saya, and I'm the Foundations of Inclusion and Accessibility project leader. So Bojana, do you want to take it away?
Yep. Thank you so much, Tony. So continuing to talk about this project just a little bit more, starting in September, as we were documenting approaches to access during the pandemic, as I was talking to staff working in access in different cultural institutions, as we began to get responses back from the survey, we had created, we started to see that there seemed to be a renewed attention to access in these cultural institutions because of the visibility of being online, everybody congregating online to participate in different virtual events. And so one of the things we think about in the future, and Tony and I have talked about this within our committee, is, how do we sustain that momentum and that renewed attention to access? And also thinking beyond the possibilities or the current options that there are for access. And I know for myself, I have thought about access for a long time as accommodations, as the services that are provided by the institution. And I think, though, being in these virtual spaces consistently together as disabled people and participating, we've realized that access is has to go beyond these accommodations, has to go beyond captioning, sign language interpretation, verbal descriptions, and things like that. We have to create more of a culture of disability and representation and visibility, and that goes beyond a checklist. And I just want to stop and see, Tony, if you had anything to say about that, as I know we have talked about a checklist a lot in our conversations, and within the Mapping Virtual Access in Cultural Institutions Committee.
Yes, and as Bojana alluded to, as a wheelchair user, there's a big difference between access and an equitable experience, and asking myself the question, am I welcome at the table once I enter a space? And I think that's what we really try to bridge the gap between that, to really make sure we're looking for equitable experiences beyond just basic accommodations. Bojana, would you like me to go to the next slide?
Yes, that would be great. I was actually going to ask you about that. Yes, please.
Perfect. So the next slide just highlights one of the questions in the survey. So question 21, in your opinion, what next steps can cultural institutions make in order for virtual programming content to be more accessible and inclusive? Please rate from 1 to 5, and 1 being most important. So number 1, including more disabled people in leadership. 2, more training for cultural staff. 3, sharing more online content created by disabled people. 4, finding creative ways to provide access. And 5, collaborating with organizations like MAC, Department of Cultural Affairs, or the Chicago Access Cultural Consortium. And we had a total respondents of 50%.
Yeah,
I mean 50 respondents, I'm sorry.
Right. Thank you, Tony, for reading that. That's a question that was on our survey that we sent out to 63 different cultural institutions in the New York City area. And I think something that struck us was the high amount of people that, and not surprisingly, that decided that it's important to have more disability leadership within cultural institutions. Like, that's the most important next step as far as access. But something that interested me was not as many people, or much less people, had identified, sharing content made by disabled people as something that was also important. And I think that access, it's so many different things. It's representation, it's visibility, it's having a job in an institution. And I think that one thing that we absolutely have to think about as far as the future of access and what this pandemic has shown us is that if we have something that disabled people have been asking for a long time, which is remote work opportunities, opportunities to participate virtually, that we are able to participate more. And that's something else, Tony, if you want to elaborate on that as well, that would be great. Just talking about remote work.
Yeah, and I think, again, as Bojana stated, right, for many years, disabled people have advocated for not only remote work, but for flexibility and adaptability, yes, which we've seen in pandemic. And so it kind of shows that now all of a sudden these things are possible, when we've seen for years that we've been told no repeatedly. And so now, right, we're no longer going to be able to use the excuse of it's not possible, because we've seen during a pandemic, more accessibility, more flexibility, more opportunities for disabled people to participate were possible. And so we don't want to lose that momentum, right? And we don't want to go backwards. I hear a lot of people saying, I want to go back to quote unquote normal, but for us disabled folks, we don't want to, because during this pandemic, one of the silver linings has been the increased access and more attention to our needs.
Right, at least virtually, right? For me, as somebody who lives with low vision, I have noticed an increase in an attention to image description and alt text. And, that is, I think, because everybody is spending more time online virtually, there has been, I think, significant messaging from different disabled activists and groups calling for more access. And also, I think it's all so much more visible. People are noting, things like captioning ASL when they're watching a video later of a performance. I think there is, some kind of accountability that also exists there as well. And so these are things that are possible and that have been possible. But some of the things that I've heard, in this work, in this research from different people in cultural institutions is now that they've had the time to learn how to do something like alt text and the time to add alt text to their social media or their websites. And, that makes me think, well, why wasn't that time allotted before? I mean, if you really think about adding alt text to an Instagram post, it's something that can take 10 minutes or less. I think that there is just maybe people for the first time are realizing how important, because everybody is now in this virtual realm, how important it is to make sure that everybody's having a more equitable experience online as well. I have this concern. Many other disabled people I spoke to have this concern. Also, people working in cultural institutions are concerned that we were going to lose this virtual programming, virtual content that has been so focused on. And partly some of the benefits, huge benefits for disabled people have been, this ability to attend these events from home, not having to navigate the subway, navigating streets that might not be safe. Also, having captioning built into now to things like Zoom allows for that additional layer of access. But institutions themselves are also interested in retaining this virtual programming because that means a larger audience, going from maybe 300 people who would be experiencing their events to thousands of people from all over the country and all over the world. So there is also that incentive. But as most of you know, if you're working in access, the concern is money, which it always comes down to as far when it comes to access, money and time to make these things happen and to maintain these different things that are have become so vital during the pandemic. Tony, I wanted to check and see if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I guess I kind of wanted to just switch gears a little bit and just back to the question because it's really, really important. So a lot of people put, including more disabled people in leadership. They value that very high on the rating scale. Right. And that's great. That's exciting. But what is the action associated with that? Because we want to see more disabled people in leadership, but oftentimes we see a lot of non-disabled people doing access work. So I guess, as we're thinking about kind of staying with this momentum, thinking about, are you marketing to this specific group of people? Are you seeking out opportunities for disabled people to take on leadership roles? Because more often than not, there's a lot of non-disabled people in the leadership roles. I guess that's just something I wanted to add. And I know, Bojana, you too have a lot of feelings associated with that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, as far as we're thinking about access for disabled people and creating a culture of equity for disabled people, we also have to be the gatekeepers. We also have to be the people who are in charge of access, who are there with the lived experience to be able to provide the more holistic, comprehensive type of access that I think a lot of disabled people are looking for. And I think some of the things I've also heard from people that they feel has ways they've been able to incorporate more disabled people into their institutions during the pandemic is through remote internships or in remote work. So I think those are two key things that can also contribute to disabled leaders in the field, and something that I think we absolutely have to push for in order to fulfill what a lot of us have been asking for, which is more leadership by disabled people. I want to make sure I have some time to also address some of the questions and concerns that were in the comments, which really it focused around a lot of what we were already talking about here. The concern about virtual programming not being sustained, that the attention to access will go away now that we're going to be back in person. And so I just wanted to take a little time to address that and also just make some suggestions as more like broader suggestions as to how we can keep some of what we learned and carry it over, once we are in whatever type of hybrid programming or whatever kind of programming we may move into in the future. I think that one thing that's really important, I think that many of us have learned during this pandemic, is it's important to think creatively and to kind of approach things with an experimental approach. I think this has allowed organizations to reconfigure their programming and their content in a way that continues to engage audiences. And this is something that has existed. We are capable of doing it. And I think that if we can continue to utilize that as we go forward and think of access through a creative lens as opposed to a compliance-based lens, I think that opens up a lot more possibility in the future for access. I think also it's okay to also fail forward, making mistakes. I think that also was something that happened a lot, during this pandemic. People were just learning for the first time, how to use Zoom, how to implement captioning, how to make things interesting and accessible at the same time. And people made mistakes, but they kept on trying and moved forward.
Bojana, I think we're out of time.
We
just
are.
Quickly wanted to just say on the slide, you just see our contact information. So first we have Bojana Kokliat, the Mapping Virtual Access in Cultural Institutions project leader, and her email address is macleader, mvaci@gmail.com. And then we have my email, which is Tony Saya, and again, the Foundations of Inclusion and Accessibility Project Leader. And my email is macnyctleader@gmail.com. And we know that these are really rich conversations, so we encourage you to email us and continue them. So thank you very much.
Claire appears.
Thank you so much, Bojana and Tony. Really appreciate what you shared here about really solidifies the collective desire for next steps around access and what's shown up as a really high priority for your survey respondents. So thank you so much for sharing that with us and for being here. At this time, we're going to move on to our next panelist. So we're going to hear from Jaron Herman from Kinetic Light in New York. He's going to be presenting Welcoming a Score. And Jaron and then the following presenters will all be speaking for about 8 minutes before I join them back on screen to just talk through a couple questions. So Jaron, please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and give a visual description. Thanks for being with us.
At left an ASL interpreter, at right Jaron.
Thanks so much, Claire. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaron Herman. I'm a dark-skinned Black man with short locks. I'm wearing a kind of like mint greenish short sleeve t-shirt with like a black and white collar and accents on the sleeves. I'm sitting here, my pronouns are he and him. I'm sitting here on ancestral land of the Ohlone people and the Ramaytush. And I'm really excited to be here. It's actually really lovely to have to be following up that wonderful analysis of our last two speakers. I've had the pleasure of being in community with Bojana for a while, and so I get really excited about the idea that there is cross-cultural conversations and that there's a through line. Today I'll be talking about welcoming as a score in a process for how disabled artists in particular are experiencing and understanding the pandemic. And so I will just be speaking at you for a little bit. I welcome you to sit back, relax, find release in your shoulders, find your breath in your belly as I speak. This is complicated. The disabled artist has not chronicled the pandemic in any outwardly reflective manner because they experience their own mini pandemics monthly, yearly, daily. Think on that. What we've learned in this is how unprepared non-disabled people are to become inhibited. The way we've reacted and analyzed this time confirms the palpable fear of debility. Opening is becoming synonymous with it as code for overcoming. Remaining closed is also signaling a failure of innovation, however. Staying closed does not mean any greater mitigation of the other crises that have occurred as we see geopolitics continue to turn in the midst of a pandemic. We must transfer this preparedness and living withness to the next phase. Disability arts has long identified the aesthetics of embodiment as a central force in art making, but now we transfer that aesthetic to design environments and procedures that embed our values. During this pandemic, the arts community exhibited a valorous and harrowing zeal to program online content to stretchify their audience's displacement and processing, at the chagrin of the displaced processing artist. Organizations and groups quickly assembled chain letters and mini festivals and online distractions. Wherein there was already a desire to create work for online, I refer to the speed and frenzy it took on characteristically. Physically integrated dance companies scrambled to innovate and keep up with industry standards. I saw compromise. I almost compromised. I was invited to revive a solo on location somewhere, but was mired by the urgency through which it was offered. The time between invitation, contracts, and production were too short for me to make meaningful, artful decisions. I was so frustrated, I withdrew. The process was fast for even a non-pandemic year, but I understood the institution was panicked and showing an emulation of fear. Fear of money loss, fear of cachet loss, of loss, which boils down to debility again. This described power dynamic is common. Non-disabled artists contend with the same urgency. When we are means to an end within a budget line, we are equally regarded as inanimate. And especially due to the scarcity with which disabled artists are authentically invited into spaces, this persistence stalls growth. I'd like to lift up folks that have made me feel seen and loved throughout this pandemic. Alice Shepard, Constantino Savetsanos, yes, Jordan Lord, Carolyn Lazard, Joselia Hughes, Kevin Gotkin, Yo-Yo Lin, Ezra Benes, Jerome Ellis. These artists have been creating in parallel and interdimensionally, where one is producing a full dance party for the people, the other is scribbling in their bed. Some have practices that need the slowness and solitude to create 5-6 minutes of any one thing. Some respond to each other. So how is this next phase like a dance? What to say about relationship? During this reckoning with the myths of white supremacy, a phrase articulated by poet Harmony Holiday, and the many, many products of it, I've heard Harmony Holiday, Harmony Holiday, and the many, many products of it, I've heard many BIPOC people say that X doesn't love us. I pause. What does it take to love? Some think love is acceptance or compassion or justice. The issue is that it changes for the person and the moment. So I wonder about our fatigue as well, a lover's fatigue. Are we the lover if we want to also be the loved? If we are also the lover, what do we love? And what if we don't want to be the lover, but only the loved? We need a space to refuse. However, when you refuse, you forfeit something, a check, a byline, social status, while you retain your dignity, which you've identified as more valuable. This is important as you begin the dance. The dance is only a series of yeses, yes to agreement on aesthetics, and institutions need to self-assess their motivation for invitation and hold to that. Your partners now, make welcoming a priority. There's also a yes to agreement on access, which is not separate from aesthetics, except for within budget lines. This is artist-led, and the institution can learn how to release with an artist's work by asking questions of their space platform. There are many more agreements, but they must be personalized. Because the pandemic has multiplied our causes for safety, well-being, and justice and futurity, we must now assume variety from our artists. Thank you.
At top, Duran and Claire. At bottom, an ASL interpreter.
Duran, thank you so much. I really appreciate this concept of dance as a metaphor for the future. It's a really lovely and powerful way of helping us to visualize this next phase. Thank you so much for that. I do have one question I'd like to pose that came from the audience in advance of the event, which is, what are the most riveting examples of cultural organizations that are moving forward as a result of this hiatus?
Yeah, so I think the ones that have not thought of this as separate from what they already do. Excuse me. I'm thinking about, well, actually, it's really artist-led organizations, but Erica in UK is one such that I thought were doing great work in terms of their community activating. So that springs to mind right now. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then we had one other question. What is your vision? And it's probably hard to put it in few words, right? A vision of a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I think I echo what Bojana said earlier, and Tony said earlier about the idea that we're not separating the things that we've learned in pandemic into our next phase, that we take some learnings and some principles from this time that we've been embodied together in this way and transfer that. And I think that that's my vision, that we kind of take out the post as a means of like, as like a progress report. Yeah.
Definitely, yes. Thank you so much. Really glad you could join us today and appreciate hearing your words. Thanks for being with us, Jaron. Okay, so at this time, we are going to transition to our next speaker, Ross Edelstein from the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis. Hello, Ross. So Ross is going to now present Within, Not Without, Setting Up Success at the Eiteljorg Museum. So Ross, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself, your pronouns, and give a visual description. Thanks, Ross.
Ross appears.
Yes, hello. So my name is Ross Edelstein. Use he, him pronouns. I'm a mid-20s white male with brown hair and wearing a dark gray suit jacket with a purple and white shirt with a purple tie. Had to actually look at it to make sure I remembered what I was wearing. Behind me is a photo of the Eiteljorg Museum and the grounds. It is a tan museum with a lush green lawn in front of it.
Slide appears. Introduction.
To get started, I will give a little bit of background on sort of where I got here and what I'm presenting on, because a lot of it is particularly related to my specific circumstances. I'm actually an intern and my last days are next week. We'll get to that in a moment. My background is that I have a BA in history from Trinity State University, an MA in museum studies ending this year from IUPUI here in Indianapolis, and I will be starting a PhD in special education this fall at Indiana University. I got really started in accessibility work in fall of 2019, and since then, I've been able to work with the Indiana State Museum, the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, and currently I am the public programs intern at the Eiteljorg Museum, which focuses on Western art and Native American art. I'm also a person with autism, so this is something that is very important to me because a lot of museums want to do things for people with autism, but not with people with autism. And the Eiteljorg has been very good about making sure that my perspective on not just my own disability, but on being disabled as a general state has been included. Moving on, here I have a picture of a group of people at an exhibition with sculpture behind them in bronze, with a man sitting in a chair holding a microphone. This is to help provide context to what the Eiteljorg was doing before I started. They had an internal accessibility team far before I started at the museum. And this team was made up of people from various departments. They had also started a partnership with the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired in Indianapolis. And the culmination is actually what you see in this image, Please Touch by Michael Naranjo, who is a Native American artist who is blind and who creates sculpture that is intended to be touched. And in general, because of the way that the museum works with Native American artists and just in their general practice, the museum has a philosophy of inclusive practice. which is how I ended up getting into this position in order to give that lived experience in making accessibility happen. Um, Moving on to some of the projects that I've done a lot with various areas. So generally, I worked on making reports on how various aspects of the museum are actually accessible, from the actual physical site, looking at things like the size of font, to how can you actually move a wheelchair around the museum, um, to looking at the website and seeing what potential accessibility issues exist there. Because as others have mentioned, websites are one of the biggest areas of visitor traffic currently. And even going forward, will be the first spot that people engage with your museum, especially disabled people. I've also worked on developing internal capacity. A lot of this is from just being around. As I said, simply being present is an important part of accessibility because it puts a face to the issue. Of course, everybody understands that you need to be accessible, but being able to actually have somebody who is, oh, this is why we need to offer accessible options for people with autism or offer various supports is incredibly important. Some of that is working with marketing to help them understand how do you actually tell people that these exist. Some of this is talking to that accessibility team I mentioned before. Some of these are presenting to the entire staff and working with other departments. I have also done a number of different projects specific to autism. I helped develop a social narrative. I helped develop a plan for a sensory-friendly day. Of course, after the pandemic, the museum is already what I would consider as a person with autism sensory-friendly, as it doesn't have any unwanted sounds or lights shining in someone's face, which means that the museum needs to provide sensory input because art museums don't often have things that you can interact with in a sensory map. I also developed these sensory bags, which you can see on the left rather, which include a stress ball, sunglasses, earplugs, a what's it fidget, which is the wooden block, a fidget spinner, a tangle texture, and what I have developed as sensory art, which is simply just art that has textures on it that you can touch. And this is both in terms of paintings and 3D art. Now, I'm also happy to say that, and I might be wrong, please inform me if I'm wrong, that we are the first museum to offer a purpose-built sensory room and nursing/guardian room. Um, we were lucky enough that out that our fundraising team was able to get the money to develop this room and to provide not only a space but also all the accoutrements to put inside of it. This will be opening in November. Just for time's sake, I will move on. And I'm also going to continue to work with the museum. I might be an intern. My time might be ending very soon, but I'm still around. And with my PhD, I'm still going to be doing research at the museum. We're also working to develop an advisory council to help bring the voices of people with disabilities into conversation with museum practice. The staff is continuing to hold the accessibility team and is continuing to work with communities partnerships, such as the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and with a local organization called Tangram that provides services for various disabilities. Now, for contact information here that I have on the screen, I have my own contact information. This is my personal email since I won't be at the Eiteljorg after next week, but I also have the contact information for my mentor who is going to continue to spearhead these projects. And it's here below.
Ross Edelstein, ross.edelstein@gmail.com, Sandy Schmidt, sschmidt@idlejorg.com. At Center, Ross and Claire.
Great, thank you so much, Ross. What I really appreciate so much about these next steps is that all of these somehow involve some degree of cross collaboration between departments, right? And that engagement piece with staff, which is so critical for sustainability. Thank you so much for sharing all of this about your experience and the progress at the Eiteljorg. I do have one question that I think we have time for. Have you implemented any changes or adaptations at the policy level of your organization that will be sustained in the future, regardless of what our post-pandemic world looks like? Is that something you could speak to?
Yeah, because I think that there is a misunderstanding. Policy is not the important part of accessibility. It's attitudes. As everyone else has said, it's not about, having things in place. I'm sure we can all talk about times where there has been a written policy that someone has specifically ignored. This even goes to federal law, the ADA. Number of times that places have ignored the ADA for whatever reason is astounding. I think that the most important part is that I've changed the attitudes of people to understanding that you need to ask about, for example, what do people with disabilities need? That you need to go to your exhibit design meetings. We are redoing a number of our spaces, and in every meeting, I have heard that people have been talking about accessibility since I have been showing up and being present and being somebody that they can associate with what does it actually look like to serve people with disabilities, and also being able to translate that. I am in a world where I can speak both the language of people with a master's degree and the language of people with disabilities, particularly autism, which is one that is not very well included in museum practice. I think that that is an important part of what I've been able to do, is being able to bridge this gap and create these changes in attitude more than policy.
Thank you, Ross. Yeah, you make a great point of how attitudes and mindsets about inclusion really are the foundation, right, in order to create sustainable changes and influence policy and have intentional planning. So thank you for making that point, and thank you for sharing your story and joining us today. Great to have you. So next we will learn about a New York-based nonprofit called Arts and Minds. We're going to be joined here by Carolyn Halpin Healy, who is going to join us on screen now and will be presenting Arts and Minds at Home, the catalytic effect of COVID-19. So Carolyn, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, your pronouns, and give a visual description.
Carolyn appears.
Thank you, Claire. My name is Carolyn Halpin Healy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white cisgender woman with long brown hair streaked with gray in front due to my age of 60 years.
Slide appears. Arts and Minds logo. Next slide. Agenda.
The talk, I have a 5-point agenda here. A brief introduction to Arts and Minds, what we knew in March 2020, our biggest challenges, what we've learned, and our current thinking and new directions. Arts and Minds was founded by myself and by Dr. Jamie Noble, so a doctor and a museum educator, with the express purpose to improve quality of life for people with dementia and their caregivers through meaningful engagement in museums. That text is on this slide in black sans serif letters on a white background, and there is a photo below of a group of 4 people in an art museum. The walls are covered with very colorful works on paper, mostly watercolors, hung edge to edge, not framed. And we see the Arts and Minds facilitator looking at a caregiver who is speaking and listening hard. We can tell by the way that they're standing, and the caregiver, the professional caregiver, is identifiable by her pink scrubs. I'm including this timeline here because we're talking about post-pandemic, but really the situation in 2020 was really something much more than pandemic. And so in New York City, the first confirmed case of COVID-19 was on March 1st. Arts and Minds is led by an epidemiologist who called off our meetings for our vulnerable participants on September 7th. And then the major changes began, much as one of the previous speakers mentioned, the kind of frantic scramble to figure out what we were doing, and left many museum educators underemployed or unemployed. The killing of George Floyd, of course, in Minneapolis, rocked the country. And I think anyone who works with art, these events leading up to the storming of the Capitol have impacted our work all year. The visual description of this slide is for each of the sort of moments in time that I have described. There's kind of a tablet, and the major events are topped with photos from the public spaces around the country. But moving into 2021, I think we're looking towards a year of museum innovation and access innovation. So what did Arts and Minds know at the beginning of the crisis? We knew that dementia is a social justice issue, that dementia caregiving is high touch, that art is intellectually and emotionally stimulating, thought-provoking, elevating, and inspiring. We knew that regular participation in cultural activities reduces apathy, agitation, and depression for people with dementia. And we knew that the crisis would end and that Arts and Minds would resume in museums if we were able to retain our teaching artists and our participants through this crisis. Those were some of our biggest challenges, and maintaining communication with participants was an equally challenging situation at the beginning of the pandemic. Supporting our team of displaced museum workers and prioritizing projects and finding new and efficient ways of working with the core team, reshaping communications. These were our biggest challenges. And of course, the increased cost of online programming, technology, planning, and facilitation. You have all faced that as well. So the slide that is on the screen now is a colorful one that has the words crisis, anxiety, introspection, and innovation in the upper right, above a Zoom screenshot of the Arts and Minds teaching team, and a curved arrow pointing towards a sort of a pop art blender with the words amazing. And it is to make the point that the team came together through a process of crisis, anxiety, introspection, and innovation to create new programs, which we're calling Arts and Minds at Home and Arts and Minds en Casa. And the slide on the screen has the logos of their two programs, and again, a classic Zoom grid screenshot of people holding up artwork. A white slide now with sans serif black type. Our online programs now exist in multiple formats. Art dialogue and art making is the most popular. We also have art conversation, which involves more works of art and no actual hands-on art making. We've introduced a program of art and movement since so many people were at home, not moving very much, and also self-care for the caregiver. We've invited artists to present studio visits, and this has really been thrilling for people to get an inside look at a working artist. And Rhythm and Reason is a new partnership with the National Jazz Museum in Harlem and jazz artist and new Guggenheim Fellow, Helen Sung. So what have we learned? We are uniting families globally. In the upper right, we see a picture of a smiling woman holding up a cutout heart with the red, white, and blue of the Venezuelan flag. Online programming has increased access for everyone. We found that older adult participants are able to transition to an online platform. So those were our three big learnings, which have led directly to our current thinking and new directions. We have a wonderful team of talented, diverse, compassionate educators, and they need paying jobs. And Arts and Minds as an organization has a right and a responsibility to advocate for them. Our longstanding commitment to diversity, equity, access, and inclusion must continue in programming and staffing. What started as an emergency response will become central to what we do from now on, and Arts and Minds will maintain programs online even after museums reopen and begin to safely welcome groups of people. And we think that online training is the key to sharing our work. And so we're developing an online training course, which when it's ready by later in this year, perhaps you'd like to check out if you have an interest in working with people with dementia and their care partners. Thank you so much. Again, I'm showing the Arts and Minds logo, which is a plus sign with a red square at the top, a lime green square at the bottom, sky blue at the right, orange at the left, and a sort of a sunshine yellow in the middle. And my contact information, Carolyn Halpin-Healy. My email is chalpinhealy@artsandminds.org. Thanks so much for listening.
At top, Carolyn and Claire. At bottom, an ASL interpreter.
Carolyn, thank you so much. The work you're doing is so amazing, and it's just so valuable for all of us to be centralizing this idea that engagement with art is such a powerful tool for well-being, right? And for healing and
Absolutely.
For all of us. So thank you so much. You actually covered both of the questions in some form or fashion that were asked. And since for the sake of time, we're just gonna continue to move on. So thank you so much for being with us and for sharing about Arts and Minds and the exciting things you have planned for the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, so at this time, we are going to move on to hearing from Charlotte Martin, is of the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York, and she's presenting today about designing a mobile guide to promote accessibility, safety, and autonomy in museums. So Charlotte, please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and provide a visual description. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claire. So once again, my name is Charlotte Martin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with long, dark brown hair. I'm wearing earrings and I'm wearing a purple dress with a floral print. And I have a virtual background of the flight deck of the Intrepid Museum with our logo. And basically what being on the flight deck means that there's a metal floor with a couple of helicopters and airplanes behind me and the skyline of Manhattan behind that.
Slide appears. Title of presentation.
I work at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, where I'm the Senior Manager of Access Initiatives. And as Claire mentioned, I'll be speaking about designing a mobile guide to promote accessibility, safety, and autonomy in museums. And my email address is cmartin@intrepidmuseum.org. And all of my slides will have a banner at the bottom with the Intrepid Museum logo and our website, intrepidmuseum.org. So to start off, just for a little context, the Intrepid Museum is a museum located in New York City. We are in fact floating in the Hudson River because we are based primarily on a former aircraft carrier that served from 1943 to 1974, and we've been a museum in New York City since 1982. And so this photo is taken from the West Side Highway. So we see the front and side view of the ship. It is quite large. It's 900 feet long. It's about 8 stories tall, painted gray. It starts really narrow at the bottom and gets wider to the top where we have our flat flight deck where aircraft used to take off and land. And so we're located out on the river. And our mission today is to promote the awareness and understanding of history, science, and service in order to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire our youth. And as others have already described, in March of last year, we of course had to shut down very suddenly in the face of the pandemic. We very quickly pivoted our programming to virtual, initially through sending out packets and materials and then starting live programming online. We have a wide array of programs developed for and with visitors with disabilities. We have a veterans initiative, and we work with a wide variety of local and geographically distant audiences. So while we were pivoting to these online programs, we were also starting to think ahead to the future, to when we'd be able to reopen. That spring, that summer, we didn't know when that was going to be. Although as the summer progressed, we realized it would be toward late September. And so as we were preparing to reopen, we started thinking about some of the challenges which are listed here. We knew that we would be working with reduced staff and budget, very unfortunately. And we were really concerned as we were getting ready to open about physical distancing, about being able to maintain physical distancing around exhibit labels and in tight spaces, for which there are quite a few in this ship. Although it's a very large ship, there are a lot of tight spaces in here as well. And so we were concerned about that. We were also concerned about the hygiene of lending materials to visitors. We have audio guides that would be available to rent ordinarily, and we were really concerned about that, especially at that point in the pandemic when we didn't know quite as much about how it was spread. We were also concerned that we also had the challenge, and this has been an ongoing one, about how we have interpretive content distributed among many resources. So we have the audio guide, which is kind of outdated at this point anyway, but it is our main source of having multiple languages available, including an American Sign Language version. We have a tactile guide with talking pen that's available to borrow primarily for visitors who are blind or have low vision. We have, of course, the exhibit labels, and we have web content like on our YouTube channel and our Google Arts and Culture page that were just not connected. They all had kind of overlapping content, but they were different and they were not together in any way, whether you were on site or off site. And then, of course, we had our educator-led programs. So we looked for opportunities there. We saw an opportunity to bring together interpretive content from multiple sources in one accessible platform. So for example, I have a picture here of a page of pages 6 and 7 of our tactile guide showing the hanger deck. And we can see that it has some wayfinding using raised lines to lead to some raised images of some of the artifacts on display, including an airplane, a propeller, and a steam accumulator, as well as the talking pen that goes along with it. And so we thought maybe this is an opportunity to actually include some of the description in there with some of the other content on the audio guide, which were not previously integrated. We wanted to create a more flexible and adaptable platform. Both the audio guide and the tactile guide, for example, are really challenging and expensive to update. And we wanted to use build on our existing relationship with the NYU Ability Project. So it's the Ability Project at New York University that we'd already been working with on an IMLS funded project to develop sensory tools for interpreting historic sites. And so we wanted to be able to build off that relationship with the faculty and the students there. We also wanted to make use of the expanded Wi-Fi at the museum. That was an ongoing project for several years. And we also wanted to be able to bring interpretation of less accessible spaces out of those spaces as well. So for example, I have a photo here of the anchor chain room. This is a room that has massive chains that would hold the anchor of the ship. There are kind of all sorts of other obstructions in the way, pillars, and kind of other large cylinders that the chains would wrap around. It requires going through a raised doorway in order to get through, really challenging space. And so we wanted to be able to bring some of the interpretation that exists here out. So our project goals, to summarize, were to substitute the already existing shared audio guides, prevent crowding around labels and in tight spaces, provide multiple entry points for users, assist with wayfinding, bring additional context to the current exhibit labels. So once again, taking advantage of that online content and the stuff and putting that together. Make interpretation available outside exhibit spaces, weave accessibility resources directly into this product, and create something flexible, accessible, iterative, and affordable. And when I talk about the multiple entry points that I mentioned, we mean that we know that people might want to use this in different ways. And so it's about weaving that together so that you can use it for wayfinding or to learn more about a specific artifact. Our team included folks at the Intrepid Museum on the exhibits and curatorial side, Access with me, our marketing team, which included visitor services and the website, development to try to raise additional funding for this, our IT department, and then of course our colleagues at the Ability Project, as well as user testers that we'd bring on both informally and formally with museum volunteers and our advisory council. And we tested early on and got some early feedback from screen reader users. Our process was to identify the platform. We decided to use a mobile site on WordPress because we already use WordPress. It's easy to update ourselves. We wouldn't have to rely in the future on a third party to help us do that. There was easy accessibility integration, including with users' preferred settings. So if someone uses settings on their own mobile device, they'll automatically work in there with the way we set it up. And there are clearer standards with the web than with apps. We focused on digital text, so it'd be screen reader friendly. And we did note the need to have some devices available in case people don't have their own smart devices. And I know I'm tight on time, but we took a content inventory. So that meant keeping track of the labels, the visual descriptions we already had written out and we're using, videos that we had, as well as supplementary photos and content that we have in our archives that we just don't get to use very often on display. We wanted to ensure the accessibility of content and user experience throughout. So that meant making sure that all of our videos that we were using had captions, making sure that we had descriptions and alt text for all of the images we're going to be including, and writing out descriptions of the videos because we didn't have audio description tracks on those videos for the most part. So in consultation with some folks, we decided to write short descriptions of those and have those available along with the transcript in addition to the caption videos. We selected the initial stops. We voted on this based on what we know were popular and also areas that were less accessible, physically accessible, or were possible choke points. We had an iterative process. So we tested throughout both informally and formally so we could continue to enhance. And we decided through that to incorporate wayfinding through both maps and descriptions that people could expand to find their way to their next stop. And those were really fun for me to write. And then we came up with the development of signage and QR codes to make sure that they were actually accessible. I have a couple of screenshots of the guide. You can also explore it yourself at maps.intrepidmuseum.org. But the flow basically is that you enter the page, it says browse our interactive guide below, choose a level and explore or search by exhibit here. So you can use it to input a specific number to find your way, or you can click through. So here flight deck is highlighted. It shows the different levels of the ship, which we did because they're not obvious terms. These are not like first floor, second floor, third floor. It's flight deck, gallery deck, hangar deck, third deck, and the pier. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see the flight deck, you'll get a little overview, and then you'll get the list of things that have information. And so in this case, we have the Lockheed A-12 highlighted. It has a brief description. You can click here for more information. And then on each page, so this is the A-12, you'll find what level it's on, fast facts, photos and videos, exhibit description, more information, and statistics. And under a basic map of it, you can actually click through to read directions to find this artifact. The fast facts are highlights, the things that we get masked the most. We have a photo with a description, with a caption that also has a description, it's alt text, and then an example of the photo and video content, which has a description of the video and the link to the transcript as well as the videos themselves. And if you continue down the page, you would find more information, including a more formal description and some other highlights. And then we wanted to make this available to visitors. So we include the link with tickets because advanced tickets are now required. So that way you can have it in advance. We have signage in the box office in key areas. These are QR codes as well as the links. So they say to browse your interactive guide, or for specific artifacts, we have it labeled with the number, the name of the artifact, and the QR code in high contrast text. And we actually moved them around based on observations. So just very quickly, we've received positive feedback from our initial testers, and we'll continue testing and getting feedback, especially now that we've reopened again. We opened, closed, and reopened recently. We do plan to add more stops because we're able to. We're exploring potential for additional content and experiences based on the interest people have expressed. We still need to get some devices to be able to lend now that we're open again. And I just want to note, this does not replace other resources. The other access resources, the other web resources are still available, as well as guided options. This is another way to access that information in one place. And we are developing pilot versions for additional historic sites through our IMLS project, Sensory Tools for Interpreting Historic Sites, which is really exciting. And I have a list of acknowledgements here from the team at the Intrepid Museum, the NYU Ability Project, as well as one of our main consultants, Cheryl Fogle-Hatch, who I think is here. So I'll pause here because I think there are some questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I really appreciate your subtle way of reframing challenges as opportunities. I think that's such a valuable and helpful way for us to all be kind of thinking about moving forward. So thank you so much. This seems like such an incredible tool. We're going to go ahead and move on just for the sake of time, but thank you so much for sharing all this information and the great projects that you all have been working on. Thanks for being with us today. So our final speakers will join us on screen in just a moment. So to close out, we are going to be joined by Eliza Greenberg and Ariel Lever of MAC. And I'm sorry, Ariel Lever of MAC. I just learned this, I apologize. Ariel Lever of MAC and Risa Rifkind of CCAC. So in the spirit of our collaboration, we have MAC and CCAC team members joining for this last session to discuss rebuilding cultural employment as inclusive and accessible. So welcome all. Please introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and give a visual description. Thanks.
Slide appears supporting transitions.
Thank you so much. My name's Eliza Greenberg, and I use she or they pronouns. I'm coming to you all from New York City on the land of the Lenape and Wappinger people. And I'm the project leader of Supporting Transitions. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s. I have brown curly hair that comes down to my shoulders. I'm wearing red glasses. Behind me is a white wall and a window with light coming through and some sheer curtains with small flowers on them. And my email is on this slide, stprojectleadermac@gmail.com. And Ariel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. This is Ariel speaking. I am the project manager at Supporting Transitions. I use she, her pronouns. My visual description: I am a white woman in my early 30s. I have very bright blue eyes. My curly, messy hair is on top of my head in a bun. I'm wearing navy blue headphones. I'm wearing a floral shirt with purples, hot pinks, and teal. And behind me, my background is blurred. My email is also on the slide. It is stprojectmanagermac@gmail.com.
Thank you. This is Lisa speaking. Also on the slide is our MAC logo, a little different from the one on the opening slide. This one has MAC in the center in shades of green and our full title in a circle around it in purples. And it also has the logo for the FAR Fund, who is our generous supporter of the Supporting Transitions project. So we've been really inspired by everything that everyone said. And one thing I want to highlight is how the speakers have talked about the incredible flexibility that came out of this pandemic time. We've seen that cultural organizations can reinvent and can think flexibly and creatively about what they're doing and can totally reimagine their work. So in that spirit, we're talking about how organizations can reimagine their inclusive hiring practices and how our field overall can really reimagine inclusive hiring practices to be accessible and inclusive and move to a place of centering the voices of disabled people. And I think as we're all zooming in and working from home, we've all experienced this flexibility. And so we're thinking a lot about how can we harness that for the future. Supporting Transitions is about 6 years old, and we've been working to increase cultural opportunities for adults with autism and developmental and intellectual disabilities in all areas, employment being one of them, life skills development, recreational opportunities. And so now we're today focusing on employment. But we have seen a web of sorts of best practices or practices that we think can really push forward cultural organizations in increasing their inclusive hiring practices. So on this slide, our logo in that circle is in the middle with the word inclusive hiring practices. And in the four corners of the slide are some areas that we think are really important to focus on and explore and kind of push the boundaries of in thinking about organizations as they reinvent themselves. One area is creating an inclusive cultural community. And as Jaron said, you know, making welcoming a priority. That was such a beautiful way to put it. And that's really what this is about, making welcoming a priority, both in terms of visitors to our cultural institutions, but also to the employees that work in those cultural institutions. One thing just to note is a person is not going to want to work at an institution they don't feel welcome at as a visitor. So it's so important for employment and accessibility to visitors to work hand in hand. And for, as has been said by Bojana and Tony, for disabled people to really be leading the conversation around accessibility in our organization. So this inclusive cultural community really impacts employment, and these things need to happen in tandem with each other. Another area that we think about is staff training, and how can we kind of create this inclusive cultural community and provide staff training and engage all staff members in thinking differently about their organizations. And we think about building the pipeline and customized employment. And we're gonna focus on these two areas for the next 2 minutes. So building the pipeline for careers in the arts. So we see, we've seen over time this, this pathway emerge for individuals working in cultural organizations. And on this slide, there's 4 boxes with arrows, one pointing to the other. And it goes from interest, so having an interest in working in the arts, and that I think really starts in school and arts education and needing arts education in for disabled students. The other, and then it moves to education or academic or practical training in cultural careers. And Ariel's going to talk about an initiative we do around that. Volunteering can also be a part of that. And then people can move to an internship and then eventually a full-time career. So that's kind of the pathway that we work along in our work. And I'll pass it to Ariel.
Thank you. This is Ariel speaking. On this slide, we have the words cultural careers in the arts at CUNY. Underneath it is a picture of students. There are about 30 of them. They're wearing hoodies and jackets. I believe it was like late or early spring, so a little chilly. Everyone's holding donuts because we were celebrating our final class. There's a projector light, a projector screen, and a green chalkboard that they are all standing in front of. On the corners of this slide are the CUNY logo and the MAC logo. So this course is designed to introduce students to roles and departments at cultural institutions while being given moments to assess their skills and interests within these departments and roles. A huge highlight of the program is bringing in guest speakers from the cultural field and making those connections between the students in the class and those cultural professionals and giving them exposure to one another. This is a really great opportunity for folks who might be earlier in their career or who might be earlier in their job seeking, who may know that they have skills. They might know that they have interest or passion in the arts, but they aren't really sure where those two might intersect and collide. We also know that their entry points into this work might be from a class, something that's more knowledge-based or theoretical, or something that might be more hands-on or tactical, like our internships, which we'll talk about in our next slide. This slide says internship program. There are two pictures from our internships. On the left, there is an intern in a white collared shirt with glasses. He's holding a clipboard and is in a room with a lot of furniture and objects. On the right is an intern. His supervisor has her arm around him. They are both smiling, really big smiles, and they are in an office. And so our internships, also there is the Kennedy Center logo, because our internships are supported by a contract with the Kennedy Center. So the internship programs are marked by cultural sites who host interns with intellectual or developmental disabilities at their sites. And we provide support to the interns and the sites along the way. So we provide job coaching for the interns to ensure that the sites who might be earlier on in their exploration of inclusive hiring practices are feeling supported in their work. And also we are providing training for the sites themselves as they seek to be more inclusive in their practices. So an example of this might be that we provide small suggestions for shifts, for example, for an interview, asking them to send interview questions ahead of time, and then also peeling back and encouraging them to interrogate and reflect, why are your interview processes this way? And so the pairing of these two things offer, again, that more sort of theoretical understanding of the cultural field, or a more hands-on application. And they aren't necessarily built as a trajectory, but we have seen a few of our students from the course learn about and assess their skills and interests, and then apply and get an internship the next year and be able to take some of those ideas and put them up on their feet in the office.
Thanks, Ariel. This is Lisa. The last piece that we just wanted to mention, and I won't go into detail for time's sake, is customized employment. And these are personalized work opportunities based on strengths of the individual and the needs of the workplace. And they go through a pathway of discovery, career focus, employer engagement, job development, and post-employment support and coaching. And it's really taking the flexibility that we talked about and not being tied to the traditional way that jobs are created in our organization. It's looking at the individual and the needs of the organization and making a match that is a best fit for everyone. So I thought it was a really helpful way to think about one opportunity for reimagining employment in our organizations. And we've really focused in our time with you all on entering the profession and kind of getting the job. But I know Risa is gonna talk more about leadership, and we recognize that disabled leadership is needed in all areas of our organizations, not just at the entry level. And so we'll hand it over to Risa to talk about that. Thank you so much.
A new speaker in slide appeared, Disability Employment and Leadership.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for allowing me to present for a few moments. Hopefully my slide is up and visible. So I'm Risa. I get to play a dual role today. I'm a co-chair and board member of CCAC, but I'm wearing my other hat right now as the Director of Civic Engagement and Marketing for 8825 Advancing Leadership for short. A quick image description of myself. I have about a little bit longer than shoulder length brown hair, a purple paisley top, purple glasses, all trying to match our brand color that you might see on the slide. And I'm in a very neutral background, and I'm a brown woman, and my pronouns are she, her, her. On the slide in front of you, you will see the words disability, employment, and leadership, because as Elisa said, I want to bring in the perspective of leadership in this conversation. As we reimagine what our world looks like, we hope in advancing leadership that includes having people with disabilities in leadership positions. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So advancing leadership is local to the Chicago region and Illinois. It's a leadership opportunity network and program for people with disabilities. And the slide says that we believe solving for Chicago's systemic challenges must include disability. Disability touches every community, every race and ethnicity, all genders and sexualities. We are everywhere, we are everyone. And when people with disabilities show up whole, we all benefit. We are a network of positive disruptors and believe that people with disabilities have a right to be included and equal to be authentic and whole and to contribute to society's vitality. You'll see on the slide a photo of some of our leaders in the Leadership Institute adding words to a poster-sized notepad on the wall. What this really translates to today for the call, if I can position a challenge or an opportunity, is when we are building our recovery plan, when we go back to whatever the new normal looks like, that people with disabilities are part of the not only the implementation, but the development of the plan. I think of what Ross shared earlier and his work. It's really crucial that his voice was part of the plan for the museum moving forward. And so when we are part of building inclusive solutions, we all stand to benefit. So whether that's having employees with disabilities at all levels of our institution, and also including having board members with disabilities who are part of those strategic directions and decisions, those financial decisions as well. I'm going to go ahead to our next slide, which is my last slide, as I know I'm the only thing between you and the end of this session. But Advancing Leadership has kind of three primary pieces. One is the Leadership Institute for Emerging Leaders with Disabilities. Applications open in a few weeks if you're local, or in a few months, over the summer for 2022, if you're local to the Chicago region. All fellows join our members network, which currently has over 170 leaders with disabilities, all of whom self-identify as having a disability and bring in that perspective, but are also professionals in other areas, as it's important to not silo people with disabilities into only thinking about access and inclusion, but take their legal, marketing, government expertise into account. And then really our core of our work is the Civic Connections Project, which connects our leaders to leadership opportunities. So I invite you all to be involved in our work, whether if you are someone with a disability applying to join us, and if you're not, then connecting to us to make those connections for our members to get involved in your organization to lead and to really create that just and equitable society that we're all striving for. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Claire.
At Center and ASL Interpreter and Claire.
Thank you, Risa and Aliza and Ariel as well, just for highlighting such a critical piece of access, which is inclusive hiring. And as Risa mentioned too, thinking about leadership as a really key piece to that. So thank you all. I do want to extend a sincere thanks to our wonderful partners, MAC, in putting together this two-day event, all of our presenters today, our access service providers, and the organizers that supported today's program, as well as the committed individuals who've joined us, by viewing this two-part event. So looking across the learnings and insights from last week and today, my personal takeaway is really just a feeling of hopefulness about the possibilities for the future and a great deal of excitement about the turnout of these events, both with our speakers and our audience, which I think really reflects the fact that there is a collective commitment to greater accessibility. So we hope that you receive some inspiration from today's presenters and continue to be driven to creating accessible experiences that are truly inclusive of all. Take good care and thanks for joining us.
Fade to Black, white text on Black background. Adapting and Advancing Cultural Accessibility During the Pandemic and Beyond. Day 2, Future, Cultural Accessibility After the Pandemic. Presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium and Museum Arts Culture Access Consortium. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers, moderator Claire Killey, CCAC. Bojana Kokliet, MVACI Project Leader at MAC. Tony Saya, Foundations of Inclusion and Accessibility Project Leader at MAC. Jaron Herman, Interdisciplinary Artist, Company Member at Kinetic Light. Ross Edelstein, Accessibility Consultant, Public Programs Intern at Eiteljorg Museum. Carolyn Halpin Healy, Co-Founder and Executive Director at Arts and Minds. Charlotte Martin, Senior Manager of Access Initiatives at Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum. Eliza Greenberg, Project Leader at MAC. Ariel Lever, Project Manager at MAC. Risa Rifkin, Director of Civic Engagement and Marketing at ADA 25 Advancing Leadership. Workshop Accessibility. Real-time captioning and ASL interpretation provided by Alternative Communication Services. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com.